The tram car, once a staple of towns and cities up and down the country, for the most part has been just a dusty memory since most of Britain said goodbye to them in the 1950s and 60s. However, in this former quarry in the village of Crich, Derbyshire, the Tramway Museum Society have been dusting off those memories for generations, keeping these old girls running.
So this is where I spend many of my weekends, doing this. And it's something that over the last few years I've thoroughly enjoyed.
Membership of the Tramway Museum Society entitles you to work like mad on a collection of trams which now exceed over 30 in number. And yet it's not like work for those fired with tram mania who want visitors to come and fall in love as they did before them.
So, are we all a little bit mad? Well, here's Sebastian Jones. He's a student from Sheffield and he's never volunteered at a transport museum before. And he'll be being put through his paces as a conductor. He'll be ringing the bells and dinging the tickets, and we'll be catching up with him later to see how he got on.
It's no secret that places like this rely wholly on volunteering, and while today is a good day for the museum, with 3 trams in service and a relief crew, all too often they're in the lurch for fresh volunteers.
It's been a long-term trend. I think COVID worsened it. We've been losing people for 30 years, but it's now got to a position where we're at biting point, and it's really making a difference.
And the effect this is having is all too clear. They recently had to cancel their 1940s event, which was incredibly popular due to a lack of volunteers willing to plan and run it. And day to day, without enough tram crew, the queues get longer and longer. Recently, for the first time in its history, the museum has had to employ a full-time member of staff to fill in the gaps. But surely there's a solution to this trend.
I've been in various management positions for most of my time here, and I've grappled with that question all the way along, and I still haven't got a proper answer. All volunteer organisations seem to be having more and more problems with people. They're getting enough people, not just in transport, but in theatre and anything other voluntary-wise. And we know from colleagues in other museums across Europe that they're in the same position.
And what about the youth? Why don't more young people get involved at places like this?
I think the fact that you can't become a conductor until you're 16, so it doesn't really help us, because by the time they get to 16, we've already got other interests and other things that take up our time. I'm aiming to try and improve the offer for younger people. So obviously I'm going into the world of work soon. I'm probably not going to be able to do quite as much as I do now. I'm coming multiple times a week at the moment. But once I do go and start work, I will try and still come down at least once a month. I'll try and make sure I've got time for it.
So from multiple times a week to just once a month, the cost of living crisis, along with other barriers, are stopping young people like Andrew from giving up more of their time volunteering. For example, you have to be 16, you have to have a driving licence to drive the trams, and you have to pay for your own uniforms. So the issues are clear to see, and now I've travelled to Bridgnorth, where the sound of steam engines has beckoned me to the Severn Valley Railway to speak with one of their directors, Paul Appleton, who also edits a magazine called Trackside, which regularly features volunteers in their Why I Volunteer section. So what are the kind of reasons that people like to volunteer at places like the Severn Valley Railway or the Crich Tramway Village?
Well, there's quite a lot of reasons. It attracts people, certainly in the case of older people, who are perhaps on their own. There's a sense of community, a sense of being part of a team. A lot of people come here perhaps when they've been widowed. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got younger people who want to learn new skills. Because the Heritage Railway, it's not just about running trains. There's all the things like woodworking skills, metalwork, gardening, catering. There's almost something for everybody.
And does the downturn in the number of volunteers at places like this concern you at all?
It is a concern. And this is something through a Trackside magazine that we do address, and we talk to a lot of the management at various heritage railways around the country. It's common, it's happening everywhere, and there's a number of reasons for this. A lot of the volunteers at the railways in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, these were people who were getting gold-plated pensions, early retirement. They're retiring at 50 or in their 50s, and they were looking for things to do. They still had plenty to give, and they basically didn't need to go to work and earn money, but they could come to work and enjoy themselves in an environment where they felt comfortable and they were happy. So that generation has gone, that's past. They're all now 60, 70, 80, and a lot of them, of course, perhaps are not as fit and able to work as they used to be. And then the next thing is COVID. For a lot of the older people who volunteer on railways, it was a turning point for them, and they found other things to do and other interests. And so when the railway started running again, they perhaps didn't have a reason to go back there. We're just not replacing them fast enough with younger volunteers. Don't get me wrong, this railway in particular does very, very well with young volunteers. The big concern is the loss of the heritage skills, because a lot of the enginemen, they were perhaps professional railwaymen in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and they brought their skills to the railway, and of course they're retired or they've passed away. So it's important that those railwaymen that still have those skills are passing them on to the younger generation.
One museum with a clear strategy for solving this issue is the Trolley Bus Museum at Santoft in Lincolnshire.
Tight, please!
They were founded back in 1969 and keep the lesser remembered site of trolley buses alive, housing a collection of both British and foreign buses. One way they drum up fresh volunteers is through volunteering days, where the museum is open for free to allow prospective volunteers to have a look around, have a ride on a bus and find out more.
Fundamentally, are there enough people coming in to volunteer here?
There are never enough, and there probably never can be enough. We need quite a lot of people just to open, when we open for the public. Historically, we only opened for about 30 days a year, but we're in a position now where we need to go for some major grants to help us to implement our development plan. We won't be able to get big grants only opening 30 days a year.
And just how important are days like this sort of volunteering day for getting people involved here at Santoft?
They are an important way of recruiting new volunteers, and we're very hopeful from the turnout we've had today that we are going to get more volunteers.
So here is a museum actually expanding its offer and needing more volunteers, not to just get by, but to open for more days every year. And what about our young tryout Sebastian back at the Tramway Museum? How has he got on?
So I've actually really enjoyed myself at the Tram Museum today. It's been really fulfilling, interacting with members of the public, doing the conducting role. I'm not quite sure it's something for me at this moment in time, but possibly something I could certainly see myself doing in the future, and I can definitely see why people can get a good satisfaction out of doing what they do.
So not convinced then, but Sebastian's generation is one that is about to enter the world of work and thus maybe doesn't have the same amount of spare time as someone who is recently retired. So where does this rather overcast situation leave us?
Museums like the one at Santoft show that it's not all doom and gloom. Some museums are expanding, but the fact is the sector stands in a very vulnerable position. Who knows how many more generations of children will be able to experience the magic of travelling on trams and transport that is over 100 years old. I know that from my own experience and the experience of everyone that we've spoken to here today and across the museums that we've visited, that this is one of the most rewarding hobbies in the world.
Sam Eyre, Crich Tramway Village, Derbyshire.